Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio. I just want to say after week one, we appreciate all of the support and viewership and feedback. We're building this plane on the fly, and we are very excited about the direction it's going in. Please feel free to like and subscribe to the channel for notifications and updates on future content. Um, Definitely drop comments below in a live chat. Feel free to comment and add any suggestions, anything that you may see on your end that we're not catching on our end here in production. And we are happy to be to the end of the first week of Please Call Me Crazy. So happy Friday to everyone. Although we should all be grateful and feel blessed for the things we have and to be alive. Um, this is not a happy Friday, so I shouldn't even have said happy Friday. Good Friday to you all. This is not a happy time, and I touched a bit on this on Wednesday. We focused on the State of the Union address and how the State of the Union and President Biden and the D.C. swamp has effectively been weaponized to spread propaganda to the American people. But today, I wanted to touch more on the war in Ukraine. And I said on Wednesday that the two greatest threats to the American people, to the value of American citizenship, are the debt ceiling, and by way of the Fed, Wall Street, monetary policy, the U.S. Treasury, the international banking cartel, and nuclear war. And the two are directly connected because in raising the debt ceiling, which they will do, make no mistake about it, they will be raising the debt ceiling, and it should be a slap in the face to every working class American citizen. In doing so, they plan to allocate a large chunk of that debt ceiling raise to this war effort in Ukraine. And so before we even got started today on the war in Ukraine, I want to give some context, some background context of this Cold War that we've been in with Russia since the end of World War II. Um, After World War II, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, after we defeated Nazi Germany and the Axis powers, we dropped two atomic bombs there in Japan, Nagasaki and Hiroshima. The focus shifted to communism in Russia and the threat of communism. I think it was Winston Churchill that in the war effort against the Nazi Germany at the end cautioned about the threat of communism, or the real threat of communism that was on the horizon. And so you have to understand that this war, and then what happened was we assimilated a bunch of Nazi scientists and Nazi political leaders, Nazi party leaders into the American government through Operation Paperclip. And Operation Paperclip was not only an effort that led to rocket science, you could say, right? I mean, that's how it was promoted. That's how it was advertised, that we are now in a race, an arms race, an international arms race with Russia to develop rocket technology, space technology, and all these other things. And that is not all that Operation Paperclip did. To think so, to believe that is negligent. It's naive. It's really arrogant and a list of other things. Obviously, the people and the scientists from within Operation Paperclip could have had their own motives, could have had their own agendas, could have carried on a sort of Nazi mindset that still existed or lingered over from what had just been the fall of the Third Reich. But after that, and let me be clear about this: Russia had Nazi scientists that they absorbed into their government to try and achieve the same end result in their technological scientific prowess. But to understand the difference in America's role in Operation Paperclip and the Russia's role in Operation Paperclip, or their version of Operation Paperclip, you have to understand the two cultures. You have to understand that America, in its inception, was a corporation, and that the ideals, the moral and philosophical ideals that really snuck their way in through the cracks by way of a couple great minds in our founding fathers, um, those ideals were not a representation of the way America first came together, and the corporate interest or the international interests from an economic standpoint that built America, that kickstarted America. And we carried that all the way up until World War II in many ways. And so when we came into contact with Operation Paperclip, or let's start before Operation Paperclip. One, it's worth it to understand historically that there were many people in America, this New Jerusalem, this new corporation, this new land of corporate opportunity or capitalist opportunity, that invested in the Nazi war machine, probably invested in the Nazi war machine during World War I, and they certainly had investments in early parts of World War II. So we were invested in the Nazi war machine. And by way of, I would say and argue that the Crown or Great Britain was also invested in the Nazi war machine at a time. And so our Operation Paperclip took a very different form than the Russians. The Russians hate the Germans. They hated the Germans, and they still hate the Germans to this day. There's a deep, deep um, blood feud, clan war, you could say, between the Russians and the Germans that goes all the way back to the Middle Ages, really. And so I think in order to understand where the Cold War began, at the end of World War II, and the Nazi influence or the Nazi presence in American government, in America, deep state, secret, technological war effort, and in Russia's, you have to understand the two histories. And so, Russia and Germany had great casualties in World War I and World War II. Um, they fought a hellacious war on the Russian front in World War II, and it cost the Russians, I think it was something like, at least 10 million Russian soldiers, if not more, to fight off and hold off the Nazi war machine. So there's a blood feud there, but let me pinpoint a certain history that I think is forgotten. When Nazi Germany first knocked over Poland and then turned their sights on to Russia, they had to cross over the Ukraine to get there. Now, when Nazi Germany crossed over the Ukrainians, by and large, threw on the swastikas. Let's just cut to the chase. The Ukrainians joined the Nazis, and it's really strange to see a liberal establishment that has put so much emphasis, cultural emphasis, and emphasis of narrative on the identity of our Jewish brothers and sisters and the great tragedies and genocides that they've encountered. But now in this war effort, we seem to forget the history there in Ukraine around the Jewish identity. And the reason why many of the Jews who eventually migrated to Israel and other places are Ukrainian is because there was a significant extermination of Jews in the Ukraine during World War II. I think something like 1 million Jews were killed just in the Ukraine alone. And it wasn't the Nazis that did it, or let's say it wasn't the Germans that did it. It was the Ukrainians. And if you go back far, so there's a history there with the Ukrainians and the prevailing post-World War II democratic liberal order narrative around the Jewish identity and the fight against fascism and Nazism. The Ukrainians joined the Nazis when the Nazis marched across the Ukraine, and they killed something like 7 million Russian soldiers in that situation and in that skirmish. And when the Russians finally held the Germans off, and they started to push the Russians back as they came across the Ukraine, back across the Ukraine towards Germany, they killed something like 7 million Ukrainians. So there's a body count, a historical body count that stems all the way back to World War II between these two nations. the Ukrainians, if we go even deeper into the history, the Ukrainians are Germans. There is there are two sort of hegemonic cultural and clan identities there in the Ukraine. Some are Russian, many are Russian, uh, some are German, and there is a heavy German presence in the Ukraine, and Polish, and European presence. Let's say you got to look at the Ukraine as the bridge between Europe and Asia, or one of the bridges between Europe and Asia, or Europe and Russia. It's like the last in between place, and obviously it was a part of the USSR. And after the fall of the USSR, you have a completely different geopolitical thinking around that land and that country. But effectively, when you get down to the roots of the people that live there, you have a split between Russians, people who identify more as Russian, and people who identify more as Germanic or European. And so, after World War II, we're in this fight, we're in this arms race, to get to space, to develop nuclear technology, and all of these other rocket technology, missile delivery systems, and all of these other things. Um, when the Cold War reaches its peak during the Cuban Missile Crisis, we had a country in Cuba, just south of our border, our own border, about 40 miles, maybe it's 90 miles from Florida. You get to the Keys, maybe it's a little bit closer from the Key West, and things like that. But very, very close to America. Obviously, Cuba is in effect America. Fidel Castro makes an alignment with Russia, and allows the Russians to place missiles on Cuba, on Cuba's land, and those missiles supposedly had the capacity to reach America. Now, in the culmination of this, cooler heads prevailed, and Russia eventually removed their missiles from Cuba, and ever since, we the Americans have had a long-standing embargo on Cuba for this very reason. And feel free to fact check me on this and bring the article, any reference material up in the browser for the viewers to see. But it is my understanding that our animus towards Cuba, for a long time, and the embargo that has long stood in America against Cuba, had to do with their involvement in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and Cuba's basic support of Russian armament on our border. And so, I mean, even there you see a contradiction in the narrative. We don't like Cuba, we don't like Russia, but we find a sentiment, a sort of likeness for communism or socialism writ large, but we still want to keep Cuba isolated and embargoed. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but what I'm saying is that the narrative around why we're doing these things are meant to distract you from more pertinent issues, like the one happening in Russia and Ukraine, and the history there. So after the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Bay of Pigs, which was a huge black mark on Kennedy's presidency, not him specifically, but definitely the security state around him, and a huge black mark on our military and our military industrial complex and the intelligence community, and how they run sort of these false flags, or are willing to run these sort of false flags military operations to execute whatever ambitions they may have. After this was averted, this nuclear exchange was averted with the Cuban Missile Crisis, there was an agreement reached between Russia and NATO. And that agreement was that NATO would not expand east of Poland. And I mean, that was a long-standing agreement between the United States, NATO, and Russia. And slowly but surely, we, as in America, which really subsidizes the entire NATO alliance, we have continued to expand east of Poland. We've expanded east of Poland into a number of countries there in Eastern Europe, but eventually making our way into Ukraine. And for many years, stemming all the way back to probably 2010, 2011, maybe 2014, Vladimir Putin has hinted that he is uncomfortable with America's presence or NATO's presence encroaching so closely to Russia's border. And I want to stop us there for a moment and digress, because it's not it's not that I'm pro Russia. I'm certainly not pro Russia. I'm pro America, and I believe in American citizenship, and I believe in the American identity. I believe in our Constitution. I believe in our Bill of Rights. I believe in the Declaration of Independence. I believe in the philosophical and moral impulse of the founding fathers that had a very, very rich and not rich material rich, but righteously rich profundity in them from an intellectual standpoint. And many of those same intellectual advancements in the American founding documents are what led to the abolishment of slavery, traditional chain and labor slavery that has come to be here in America, but really all around the world. For the most part, and we'll get more into that maybe in the episode here. But I believe in the American identity. So I'm an American. I'm a pro-American, and I'm not shy to say that I'm a nationalist. And such rhetoric can get you banned on a place like YouTube, because being a nationalist has become synonymous with being domestic terrorist or extremist or a conspiracy theorist or a racist. But that doesn't strike fear in my heart. The national identity, nation states are important, and I'll explain why in a little bit. So I'm not pro Russia, but I understand the history well enough to understand where we have went back on our word, and we've created the circumstance for Vladimir Putin or any Russian leader that would rise to the top, to be very aggressive militarily in that part of the world. I understand that. And I understand it because we had a very similar feeling towards Russia and towards Cuba during the height of the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis. We did not want to allow Russia to put weapons of any sort that close to the American border. And I understand why. And there are rules to war. There are certain rules to war. There are certain considerations when it comes to a nation's defense and military. So I'm not pro Russia, but I understand the history. And what I also understand is this: there are a certain number of countries in the world, a very limited number of countries, that have rejected the prevailing international banking community system. And I'm not saying that all of these countries are righteous. I'm not saying that all of these countries don't have ill motives, that they don't have a level of tyranny in their own regard, that their leaders aren't afflicted with spiritual warfare, that Satan's not at work within these individuals. I'm not saying that these people are anything other than what I'm saying, that by coincidence, if you want to call it that, there are a number of nations that have rejected to opt in to the international banking system that has prevailed since after World War II. And the Bretton Woods Conference is what initially set up that system. And if you get an opportunity, you should become familiar with the Bretton Woods Conference, which was the realignment of monetary policy post World War II, and with the fall or the abnegation of Churchill and Great Britain of their previous colonial empire. So the entire monetary system had to be restructured, and it was restructured around the United States dollar, or the American dollar, or really the America military prowess. And from the Bretton Woods Conference came the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the gold reserve, the Federal Reserves. All of these types of financial instruments were birthed from the Bretton Woods Conference. There are a few countries that have declined or rejected or fought to be brought into that scope of influence. And if you could bring those up, Patrick, that would be great. But I believe those countries are Russia, North Korea, Iran, and a few of the others escape me. But I'm pretty confident that there's one country in there that nobody would even know. There's a fourth country in there that nobody would know. And there's a couple others. Search which countries refuse to join the World Bank. And we're looking this up now for everybody that's listening. There are a few countries, and even on Google now, it's going to be hard to even find this list, because they would see that as a justification. Here we go. Okay, list of World Bank members. Okay, now what we're bringing up here is this list of World Bank countries, and on Wikipedia here, which I am not saying is an authoritative source of information by any means, and that everything you read on Wikipedia is true, but in some cases they list the facts. They're one of those double cross and triple cross sources of information themselves, where they sometimes will give you the truth, and sometimes the narrative is cooked. Here there is a list of United Nations members. There's a list of countries that are in the World Bank, and then they have a list of United Nations member states. So these countries are a part of the United Nations, but they are not a part of the World Bank. These countries are Andorra, Cuba, what does that say? Liechtenstein. Okay, Liechtenstein is one. Monaco and North Korea. Taiwan is the largest economy outside the World Bank. That's an interesting one. Followed by Hong Kong and Macau. The two observer states at the UN, the Vatican City and the state of Palestine, are also not members of the World Bank. So you see a little bit of play on both sides of a traditional superpower system at work here. And in that, what I mean is, go back to the list for me. Cuba is obviously a country that we have a rich rivalry with. Not really a rivalry, but we have a deep historical problem with the nation of Cuba. And so there's reason there. North Korea as well. Monaco is a country that's often seen as a financial haven for corrupt slush funds. So there may be something there. Taiwan is under the scope of America's influence, as well as Hong Kong and in some ways Macau, you could say. So there's all kinds of things going on there. Kosovo is not a member of the UN, but is a member of the International Monetary Fund and World Bank Group. Okay, so for a long time, these countries wouldn't opt into the world. Can you check if Iran is in the World Bank now? Nope, right there. Go back up to the list, because I believe Iran is in the. Okay, Iran did join. So Iran joined. For a long time, they hadn't joined. For a long time, Russia hadn't joined. Now they both have joined. There's definitely an animosity between Russia and the United Nations. And the United Nations was another institution that came about after World War II. And Russia was involved in the inception of the United Nations. But something that you have to understand about the Russian culture and the Russian people The Russians view themselves as their own people. They view themselves as their own sovereign continent, influenced by communism heavily, yes, but in effect, they have a very nationalist mindset. And in some ways, you could argue that nationalism and communism are diametrically opposed at their widest widest view, at the highest view, or when they're all grown up, that nationalism and communism are diametrically opposed, but in some ways they're not. And we're going to be exploring those kinds of ideas, and we're going to get to some of that here in this episode. But Russia views itself as its own country. They view themselves as their own people. They are their own race, and the Russian identity is very, very deep historical significance to the Russian people. And they are a very, very unique bunch when it comes to defending the country of Russia and the Russian identity. So much so, if you went back to the war to the time of Napoleon, when Napoleon tried to conquer Russia, the Russians were so opposed to being conquered or subdued that they destroyed their own infrastructure so that Napoleon couldn't commandeer it and use it in his war effort after he had defeated certain regiments of the Russian army in that war. They would burn Russian cities and Russian infrastructure on their way out of a given place where they had fled from defeat. So this tells you kind of the historical basis of the Russian mindset and the Russian culture. They're willing to destroy their own country to ensure that they're not subjugated or defeated or brought under the scope of tyranny. Now, Vladimir Putin's an interesting character in that he has ties to the World Economic Forum. He has ties to the United Nations. Obviously, they're one of the members of the Security Council. And if you go back into the history of the United Nations and people who spoke out against the United Nations, many of them, such as Muammar Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein in his final stint as the leader in Iraq, many of them spoke out against the nefarious practices of the members of the Security Council, and that the Security Council itself, in effect, was illegitimate because each nation in the United Nations is supposed to be equal. They're supposed to have an equal vote and an equal standing in that body, which they actually don't. The General Assembly, the members of the General Assembly do not have certain veto powers that the members of the Security Council have. And can you bring up the Security Council so we can be sure about the nations? But I'm pretty sure it's the United States, America, France, Great Britain. China was brought into the Security Council after the United Nations was formed. Members, yeah, you could just look it up on Wikipedia. The permanent seats. Yeah. Okay. Stop. Here we go. Nope. You can stop. I see it. Okay. So, and this is how it works. There are permanent members and there are non-permanent members. And the permanent members, there are 5 permanent members: China, France, the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And the 10 non-permanent members are elected for 2-year terms by the General Assembly with end of term year. So these other countries are elected to become non-permanent members of the Security Council. And right now they are Albania, Brazil, Ecuador. I think that says Gabon. Is that right? I can't make that out. Ghana, Japan, Malta, Mozambique, Switzerland, United Arab Emirates. And so they're elected by the General Assembly. Now, the reason I bring this up is that it's interesting that Russia and Vladimir Putin have been so intimately involved with the United Nations since its inception. And what you have to understand is that this is a global war. We are in a world war. We have been in a world war by way of proxy and economic trade wars and biological war, information war, espionage. For a long time, we've never been out of it. We're always jockeying for position against one another, even within the United Nations Security Council. And this latest war between the Ukraine and Russia shows that the United Nations is not so united, and that this isn't the first time that that's happened. And it's not just Russia where that comes to be apparent. Um, Russia is, Vladimir Putin's been to the World Economic Forum. So people have questions about this war in its entirety. And so do I, because in one sense, you can say that we are looking at an international jump ball. You bring me back up on there. We are looking at an international jump ball. We are looking at a jump ball between the free people of the world, all of us little people at home who look on and watch the elites or the kings or the king makers make decisions that affect our everyday lives. We, the little guys, the free people who, if united, could turn over the tables in an instant. And then you have the globalists. And when we say globalists, this is why I say, and you've heard me probably say this before, that the crown and the European monarchy are the head of the snake when it comes to globalism. That it just is a fact. And the United States is included in that crown hegemony, that European monarchy hegemony. The United States is the loaded gun for the crown and the European monarchs. And that bloodline goes back deep, and you can look into how the royal family and the monarchies of Europe began, and how they came to proliferate and find their way to the shores here in New Jerusalem in America. And so you have the globalists, you have the Party of Davos, and the Party of Davos are the leading thought leaders, the leading the running dogs of the globalist agenda. And we say Davos, for those who don't know, the World Economic Forum that was founded by Klaus Schwab, whose father was a Nazi, whose mother was a Ukrainian, and they helped the Nazis build weapons. He is the founder of the World Economic Forum, with which he was an understudy of Henry Kissinger. Their annual conference is held in Davos, Switzerland. So that's why we call them the Party of Davos. Just trying to give you guys an update, a guide, the lexicon as we develop this conversation here, because we're going to keep coming back to these topics as they develop and they get more prominent, and the stakes get more dire. So you got the globalists led by the Party of Davos. You got Russia, China, and you have us, the free people. Now, Russia and China represent national dictatorships. The Party of Davos and the globalists represent international dictatorships. So there's a battle here. There's a 4-player jump ball between the free people, the globalist, Russia, and China. And one is international dictatorship and the other is national dictatorship. Russia represents a national dictatorship. President Xi in China represent a nationalist dictatorship. Now in that jump ball, you have many angles. You have many considerations. You have, people who are as spooky as they come. Vladimir Putin's as spooky as they come. And in my opinion, he's on his own side. He's on his own side. He's on everybody's side and nobody's side. He's definitely on the side of Russia. And when you go listen to Vladimir Putin speak, if you understand the human condition, you can listen to a person speak and understand that at the height of who they are, or at the bottom of who they are, what becomes important for them, right? What is their MO? And Vladimir Putin may be a dictator. He may be a tyrant. He may be a sociopath or a psychopath. He may be a trained killer, which he is. Former KGB member. He's a trained killer, no doubt. He may be ruthless. He may be all of these things. But at bottom, he is a Russian. He believes in his Russian identity. He believes in his national identity. And he believes that if he can clear all obstacles, that Russia as a country and Russia's culture and Russia's place in history becomes his main priority. And so there's a sort of there's a sort of there's a sort of use of corruption. There's a path of corruption. There's a trajectory of corruption that all of our world leaders must engage in, and they are engaging in them. And Vladimir Putin isn't excluded from that. But at bottom, they navigate corruption differently. And in the West, because we are the loaded gun of this sort of metropolitan, globalist, technocratic, futurist culture, we navigate our corruption through chaos, not order. And when I say chaos, I mean chaos because our navigation of our corruption lacks a national identity. It lacks a fundamental identity. And in that way, the globalist identity, the metropolitan identity, this sort of global citizenship shows us where the real animus for Vladimir Putin is, where we have come to be in such a contentious situation with Russia there in the Ukraine, or with regards to the Ukraine. Because our idea is if we can navigate all the corruption that we need to, if we can engage in all the corruption we need to, and we come out of on the other side, there will be this global society, this new global society, and this new global identity that will solve all things. Now I want to stop you here. I already stopped us after World War II and the Operation Paperclip and the dynamic between Russia and America, and how the Nazi science, or Nazism as an ideology, was assimilated into two very different cultures. And I am leaving you with the 4-player jump ball between Russia, China, the Party of Davos, and the free people of the world, where you have citizenship versus international dictatorship and national dictatorship. And now I want to share this. I want to give you a framework, a fundamental framework to view these issues. Part of a fundamental framework to view these issues. There are 4 heresies of the West. There are 4 heresies of modern society. Those 4 heresies are the scientific method, democracy, computer technology, and artificial intelligence. Why do I call them heresies? Because each one, at its inception and at its height, was meant to bridge the gap between man and God. That the intelligent design, the genius of the world, the genius of the universe, the divinity in the universe, that separation, that gap of knowledge and understanding that we don't have as human beings, as mankind, could be solved through these 4 heresies. And first, it was the scientific method. It was, we can't bridge the gap, so maybe science will do it for us. Scientific problem solving, the scientific method, and trial and error, and that maybe that'll bridge the gap between man and God. And when that couldn't bridge the gap, and they couldn't find those answers, and there was still a gap that existed, humanity said, maybe democracy will do it, which was huge in France and parts of Europe, and really displaced the European divine right of kings monarchy system, and was used in that way in Europe to bring about post-Enlightenment, post-Renaissance era style of politics and ideology, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. So you had democracy that, well, if we can't actually find the truth, the real truth, the fundamental truth, the universal truth, if we can't find universal truth through the scientific method and how to bridge the gap between man and God, maybe if we get all men together, of all of mankind together, or enough of mankind together, a majority of mankind together, and we get them to agree on what reality is, then we can bridge the gap between man and God. But we're really not bridging the gap. We're more bridging the gap between each other in whatever consensus we come to. And if that consensus is corrupt, which it often is, without God or without faith or without a higher moral or ethic, then we'll use that consensus anyway, because at least we came to an agreement. And you can see where there's some the practicality in that, but ultimately we know it falls short, and that is why the post-World War II democratic liberal order, which was hailed by Henry Kissinger and these other globalists, had a huge runway. But anybody with a sane, rational mind knew that that runway would eventually come to an end, an abrupt end, and a chaotic and potentially violent end. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So you had the democratic, the democracy is we'll get together and create a consensus. And then you had computer technology. It was a long time. It was a long jump from democracy, the idea, to computer technology. But effectively, computer technology said, you know what? We've tried for a long time to get everybody to agree to spread democracy and create this sort of superficial, false sense of reality that people just agree upon. But that's not good enough. Maybe computer technology will solve the problem. And it's not a coincidence that much of this Operation Paperclip that bled into two global superpowers, both America and Russia, played a huge role in the development of computer technology. And last but not least will be artificial intelligence. And the thinking there is, well, now that we have computers and we still haven't been able to bridge the gap between man and God, we still have too much human error. We still have too much bandwidth error in humanity and mankind. Maybe we should just let the robots do it. Maybe the robots themselves will be able to bridge the gap between man and God and solve all of our problems. And all of these are a rejection of God, of God outright. It's an anti-God heretical philosophy. And it's been in effect. I mean, Descartes, I think, therefore I am, and the inception of the scientific method is hundreds of years, several hundreds of years project, experiment, thought process. And it's prevailed till now, and the scientific method has brought us to artificial intelligence, and in that we see a sort of, beginning and end of a manufactured peace. And there really wasn't peace, but there is a violence out there that we can extrapolate worse than anything we've seen so far. But we're pushing right up on that threshold right now, and that we are moving towards nuclear war rapidly. I mean, almost certainly. And it's not by accident that the real turn of the tide in the scientific method, democracy, the post-World War II democratic liberal order, was the splitting of the atom and the ability to proliferate atomic weapons and then nuclear weapons. And now, from the scientific method, we see that the splitting of the atom turned on a clock that maybe can be reversed. So those are the four heresies of the West. And I wanted to give you that framework, and I want to continue to give you a framework of my thought process on these issues and how I start to break them down at their root. Four heresies of the West. The West started to dominate the international scene, and so many other countries that weren't in the West, the traditional West, had to capitulate and conform to this sort of heretical nature. Not that they didn't have their own heretical nature, but you follow the leader, right? Do as your enemies do. Don't be afraid to imitate your enemy. That's Machiavellian Sun Tzu's sort of radical materialists art of war philosophy. Imitate your leader. Your enemy. No matter how corrupt or immoral they may be, it's justified. You have to win the war, and there's a big problem with that. And again, there's a reason why the post-World War II democratic liberal order and the war machine that comes out of it produces a similar kind of worldview that we see today. Four heresies of the West, and they match what I call the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And there are four horsemen of the apocalypse, but they are not, they are ideological. And this is an idea, this is a thought that I've been developing now for a few months, but these four horsemen of the apocalypse being ideological have deep historical deep historical validity. And I want to walk you through those because they match these heresies almost to a T. You have the scientific method that comes after the Enlightenment. You have the Renaissance, you have the Dark Ages, okay? You have the Dark Ages where we lived under the divine right of kings, where the monarchs were seen as divine themselves, and in that their authority was sort of unquestionable, unless they happened to get into a conflict with another king who had a bigger divine right and conquered him and chopped his head off and took his land and took his the ownership of whatever he had, and then I guess, you're not all knowing or all powerful, right? So there was that sort of survival of the fittest amongst the divine right of kings. So at the end of the Dark Ages and the bubonic plague and all these other things that took place in Europe, there you had an Enlightenment, the Renaissance, and the Renaissance is touted for the great art and architecture and all of these cultural advancements that came from it. You had Leonardo da Vinci, and the church had a heavy influence in that as well. You had, Michelangelo, and you had all of these things that came from the Enlightenment. You had huge scientific developments through people like Rene Descartes, and so you had the Enlightenment, and from the Enlightenment came three very important ideologies, and I want you to understand that they came from the same place in Europe, so it can help you better understand how where we are today has is connected to a foundation geographically and a foundation ideologically. Three distinct ideologies came from the Enlightenment, the post-Enlightenment era: liberalism, communism, neoclassicism. For those who don't know what neoclassicism is sort of like this reverence for the arts, this combination between arts and architecture and sort of this. I mean, it's really hard to describe. I would describe Kanye West as a sort of neoclassicist. He is very keen to art and culture and architecture or engineering, that sort of mindset. Sort of this Elon Musk is another person who you could say is a sort of neoclassicist. But the other two are you should be familiar with. Liberalism, communism came from the exact same place, came from the exact same time in history. And why do I say that? Because the start of the Renaissance was secularism. This was the rejection of the divine right of kings that turned into the working class, the common everyday citizen, rising up, mobilizing against the elites and the monarchy and saying, hey, more people are equal. And there was some validity to that. There's great validity to that. There's great Christian validity to that. And I think the church probably helped play a role in that transformation. But the devil is in the details. And the devil is a very intelligent being. And he knows and can tell when the inertia of a society is shifting and how to latch on to take a defeat and latch on to the next wave. And so we had the divine right of kings and this sort of constraint of power and the weaponization or misuse of the church or Christianity, the rise of Christianity. And then it turned into post-Enlightenment and this sort of rejection of God, that this new secular worldview would solve the gap between man and God, that we had to take a secular approach. And the scientific method was birthed from secularism. So you have horse number one, secularism, ideology, and the scientific method as an application, an applied heresy of that ideology. And next you had liberalism. That's the next horse. And secularism, again, to go back, secularism represents death. The four horsemen are death, war, famine, conquest. Okay? Death, war, famine, and conquest. Those are the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Secularism, in my opinion, represents death, the death horse, but not the death of people per se. It was a spiritual death. It was a death of faith. It was a death of God. It was a death of reverence for the holy and the supernatural, the metaphysical, and doubling down on man, on humanity, but more of a sort of humanism. Secularism, the scientific method. Then you had liberalism. Liberalism is the war horse, right? Liberalism is what we saw then after or during the Enlightenment and the wars that broke out there to sort out the monarchy in Europe. And that went on for a long time and has really prevailed until now. But we see it more in this sort of neoconservative, neoliberal mindset here in America and in the West. Liberalism always finds a way to justify war. Bread and circuses keep people distracted. Liberal worldview keep people distracted so that you can use whatever power you have to procure whatever amount of riches or material goods you want. That's what liberalism has been. That's what liberalism has served as, and it continues to today. So liberalism represents the war horse, and what came from liberalism. What came out of liberalism? What is the sidekick of liberalism? What is the application of liberalism? Democracy. Democracy is the herald of liberalism. So you got horse number 2, liberalism, the war horse, and the application, democracy. Then you had communism. And liberalism often turns into communism. And in many ways, people say that communism and liberalism are diametrically opposed. No, they're just in two different places in their own individual trajectory where they pop up around the world. And communism obviously represents the famine horse, right? The great famine. And we see around the world that when communism really takes hold, especially in Russia and China, but in other places as well, that great famine follows, right? And really, if you want to look at it from an intellectual sense or a more metaphorical sense, you could say that what communism really deprives people of, the great famine within communism, is individual sovereignty, individual rights, individual identity, and an individual relationship with God, metaphysical, spiritual. There's a great hunger that exists there. And Karl Marx, who wrote the Communist Manifesto, was explicitly secular and anti-God for the most part. Even in his personal life, he rejected God. He rejected his rabbinical lineage, his father's rabbinical lineage. And communism is in every way secular in its roots. Now, many people who claim to be communist today in the modern times will say, you could be communist and believe in God. No, you can't. You think you can. You've been tricked into thinking that you could be communist and believe in God, but really you can't. And the same way many of those people would argue that you can't believe in America and not be racist, because the sins of the founding fathers of any ideology bear down on those who believe or practice that ideology today. Just so happens that although the founding fathers had a significant racial worldview about who is human and who is not, they still professed a faith in God and a Christian faith in God. The communists were anti-God to begin with, and Karl Marx lays that out almost explicitly in his Communist Manifesto. And when you dig more into his past, his personal past, so communism is this great famine, this great hunger for a spiritual life, metaphysical life, metaphysical understanding, God, which also manifested itself into many people starving there in Russia, and many people being slaughtered or starving there in China under Mao. And what does communism connect us to? Well, socialism. This whole socialist idea stems from or came from communism. Socialism is communism's little brother, the way democracy is liberalism's little brother. I actually just thought of that on the spot here, but that is, and so when you think of that, think of it that way, that socialism is the application of communism. It brings us to this third heresy of computer technology, and many people view computer technology as this sort of capitalist phenomenon. But I view it differently, because what communism aims to do is to level the playing field for everyone. And nothing potentially levels the playing field for everyone in a superficial way, the way most communist tyrants like to see it done. It levels the playing field in a superficial way than computers, than computer technology, and by way of the internet and eventually social media. And there's a reason why there was such a profound marketing campaign and promotion of social connectivity, the social network, social media, this great awakening of being able to talk to each other around the world. So to me, social media and the internet and computer technology are a bastion of the application of socialism and in effect communism. And last but not least, the final heresy is conquest. The final heresy, the final ideology is globalism. So you had secularism, liberalism, communism, and the final is globalism. And anytime you have communism that goes to the global scale, it is globalism. It becomes globalism. But you could more so look at globalism as the last horse, the conquest horse. You could look at globalism as the merger of liberalism and communism, going back to their home root as one with a secular foundation. I mean, if you start to view it like that, I think what we're seeing in the world becomes very clear, that there are four sides. There is a four-player jump ball, and there's only one side that even has any remnant of a faith, a true hope, a true belief in a higher being or a higher ethic or moral. These other ones have been muddied by a very, very old history. Globalism, the conquest horse where power is constrained the most, where power goes the furthest around the world. Today is a remerging of liberalism and communism with the foundation of secularism. And what is the application of globalism? What's the best way to bring true conquest about, to bring a true global conquest about? Artificial intelligence. Make no mistake about it, artificial intelligence is the herald of globalism. Artificial intelligence will bastardize the intelligence of every single individual, every single human being on this planet, and will ultimately be the most perverse and pervasive anti-God mechanism that's been introduced to this world. And there seems to be a complete buy-in for artificial intelligence. So I wanted to lay those four out for you so we could get back to this four-player jump ball between us, the free people, the globalists, Russia, and China, and understand how all those ideologies play into each one of those groups on the table in this four-player jump ball. Obviously, there's a heavy communist influence there in Russia and China. The globalists, the party of Davos, I mean, they're kind of an amalgamation of both, because both of these ideologies came straight from the heart of their land and their people historically. And us, the free people, we're kind of somewhere in between. De facto, we've become, we've become this sort of secular body of of useful idiots in many ways. Some of us are patriots. Some of us are still cling to the idea of freedom. Some of us still desire to have individual sovereignty and to have a country, to have an identity. But some of us have completely abnegated all of those things for a new global identity and all of the spoils that technology and the internet have brought, that that the internet offers, that modernity offers. So understand that framework when you look at this Russia-Ukraine conflict, and then ask yourself, who benefits? Who benefits? This is a complicated question. This and I'm sure the answer is not any less complicated. And there's a couple of ways you could view this if you want to play out into the future. One, in that four-player jump ball, Vladimir Putin is making a play for his own individual position or Russia's position on the board within this new global society that they all agree or have agreed in the past is on the horizon. And they're playing information war on each other with the people to justify the move that they make in this four-player jump ball. Or there's another scenario where genuinely the Russian culture that has a deep and rich Eastern Orthodox tradition rejects this sort of anti-God nature that has become the heartstring of the globalist agenda. Now, I can't say which is which. I mean, it'd be way beyond my understanding of the players involved in this situation to give you a definitive answer. But I know those are the most likely two, the two most likely situations, or the two most likely set of circumstances. And so, how does that play out? I don't know. I don't know right now how it plays out. It seems that we're on our way to nuclear war. And I will tell you, as an American citizen and as a man who believes in this country and who believes in this country's future, who has children, who has family, I'm very concerned with the narrative that's being told about this war. And that's what I wanted to talk to you a little bit about today to end the episode. We're about an hour in, and I appreciate you guys sticking with me again. We had to make the episodes an hour and a half because I'm long-winded and I like to go into depth. And if you enjoy in-depth thoughts or in-depth conversations, please like and subscribe to the channel, because this is what we're going to be doing a lot here on this podcast. But I want to talk about the narrative that's being driven, because the narrative that's being driven is quite contradictory. The narrative that's being driven is that we in the West, American citizens, Europe, and all the other countries around the world that have opted into this World Bank, this international banking system, this United Nations governing body, all of us should oppose Vladimir Putin's actions in the Ukraine for one simple reason, because the United Nations has a long-standing decree, wars of non-aggression, and that by Vladimir Putin crossing into the Ukraine's country, or violating their sovereign border with military action, there's no other way to look at it other than Vladimir Putin has violated international law and should be viewed as the enemy of democracy, the enemy of modernity, the enemy of computer technology and artificial intelligence and the post-World War II democratic liberal order. And you'll even hear some of our politicians, such as Joe Biden, say that Vladimir Putin threatens democracy around the world and the order, the rules-based order, which is another way of saying the post-World War II democratic liberal order. And so the narrative is being driven that Ukraine is a sovereign nation and that its border it must be respected. Now, this is a particularly insane thing to promote, given that the same people who are promoting it clearly don't believe in a sovereign border here in America, and even at the broadest level, at their summits and seminars and what do they call them? Virtual meetings, virtual summits. They openly promote a borderless society. And so what they're saying in effect is that borders only count when we say they count. The same way that I told you the NBA was saying that expertise only counts when we say it counts. Medical expertise only counts when we say it counts. Only means something when we need it to mean something. And this should insult you because we do have a society that is moving rapidly towards a borderless society. And so we're being told that this war is being waged and this war has to continue with no peace talks, no real peace talks being engaged in because Ukraine's sovereign border has been violated. And I want to go back to Andrew Bustamante for a moment. I posted a video of him, another video of him talking with Lex Friedman about 2.5 weeks ago, and he's commenting on the war in Ukraine. And he's talking about a number of things, but I want you to be able to hear it for yourself. This is the intelligence community talking about this conflict and doing what the intelligence community openly admitted that they do, is to try and create a circumstance where everything the American people believe is a lie. And the head of the CIA was quoted saying that at a CIA conference or a CIA meeting back in the 70s, I believe it was. So it's been redacted. You could say it's been declassified, that CIA leaders specialize, they have expertise in misinformation. And by way of, we should all believe that this institution is marred by misinformation in its inside of it, but spiritually as an institution. So here we go. Listen to Andrew Bustamante talk about the Ukraine.
The fact is, there is no material support coming from the outside. The American Revolution was won because of French involvement. French ships, French troops, French generals, French military might. The independence of communist China was won through Russian support, Russian generals, Russian troops on the ground fighting with the communists. That's how revolutions are won. That's how independent countries are born. Ukraine doesn't get any of that. No one is stepping into that because we live in a world right now where there simply is no economic benefit to the parties in power to support Ukraine to that level. And war is a game of economics. The economic benefit of Ukraine is crystal clear in favor of Russia, which is why Putin cannot lose. He will not let himself lose. Short of something completely unexpected, right? I'm talking 60%, 70% probability, Ukraine loses. But there's still 20%, 30% probability of the unimaginable happening. Who knows what that might be? An oligarch assassinates Putin, or a nuclear bomb goes off somewhere, or who knows what, right?
Who knows
There's
what?
still a chance that something unexpected will happen and change the tide of the war. Yeah. But when it comes down to the core calculus here, Ukraine is the agricultural bed to support a future Russia. Russia knows they have to have Ukraine. They know that they have to have it to protect themselves against military pressure from the West. They have to have it for agricultural reasons. They have major oil and natural gas pipelines that flow through eastern Ukraine. They cannot let Ukraine fall outside of their sphere of influence. They cannot. The United States doesn't really have any economic vested interest in Ukraine. Ideological points of view and promises aside, there's no economic benefit. And the same thing goes for NATO. NATO has no economic investment in Ukraine. Ukrainian output, Ukrainian food goes to the Middle East and Africa. It doesn't go to Europe. So the West siding with Ukraine is exclusively ideological, and it's putting them in a place where they fight a war with Russia so the whole world can see Russia's capabilities. Ukraine is as sad as it is to say, man, Ukraine is a pawn on a table for superpowers to calculate each other's capacities.
That's the CIA talking right there. I mean, that's the security state telling you what's going on with this war without telling you. You know, they're telling you three things at once, and that's the way propaganda works. It's lies, but it's also half truth and the truth out of context. And he did all three. He did a masterful job at deploying all three in that short clip there, and he did it through the entire interview. And if you want to become familiar with just how corrupt and dishonest the security state is in our country, then you can go look at any of Andrew Bustamante's interviews, because he's a trained veteran spy who understands how to use this sort of linguistic manipulation to get a narrative out there. And by the way, he has been afforded a platform to talk about these most sensitive topics on any number of podcasts. And I'm not saying that he shouldn't be allowed to talk, but I'm saying at a time where the establishment seems to make definitive declarations around what people say, what is to be viewed as a threat to national security. This guy surely gets a lot of leash to talk about a lot of things that he seems to have intimate knowledge about, being a former CIA operative. And so what did he basically say there? What he said was, let's walk through what he said. There's no outside help for the Ukraine. That's a lie. Of course there's outside help for the Ukraine. We just sent tanks to the Ukraine, and now we're flirting with the idea of sending F-16s, which Joe Biden said he wouldn't do. But who knows if that ends up being the case in the end. And we've been sending military support to the Ukraine for a long time. In fact, it's our weapons in America. It's NATO's weapons in Ukraine that have instigated this conflict. If we left, and then he says, well, we have no economic interest, that NATO has no economic interest. No, what he means is that the United States and many of the countries, well, first off, NATO does have an economic interest, because Russia is much of Europe's oil supply. So that's an outright lie. But what he means is that America, which serves as the heart of NATO, right? We subsidize NATO in every way. We are the strong arm of NATO, the NATO alliance. What he means to say is that America doesn't need Russia, that America's vital national interest is not served in Russia. And there's great truth to that. We are a country that could survive independently. It's part of the strength that we had historically. It's part of the reason why we were able to aid in the defeat of the Axis powers in the way that we were. There's a famous saying that, had Hitler been able to reach Detroit with his, with bombs and stop our production of military equipment, then he may have gone on to rule the entire world, but he couldn't. He was too far away. Location, geography. We made our military tanks and planes and things like that in Detroit, Michigan. And that was too far for his capabilities. So we have the capacity to have that sort of independence as a nation here in America. Funny that we often get caught in everybody else's world affairs and everybody else's issues when we have that capacity for true independence. And that's not by accident. And I'm going to close with that, but I want to keep down this line of thought here. So there's no economic interest for NATO in Russia. It's not true. Of course, there's an economic interest. And even if it's the economic interest that Russia won't play by the rules, that Russia continues to be an antagonist for the West in all of these places, whether it be Iran or Syria or any other number of places where we still currently are fighting proxy wars with Russia or China, and that Russia, is a formidable adversary. So of course there's an economic interest. And then he says towards the end, he goes, Russia can't lose. Russia knows they need the Ukraine. Russia will not surrender, right? They will not surrender. And the future of their agriculture rests on keeping the sphere of influence in Ukraine. That they have oil pipelines that literally run through Ukraine. He's telling you it's not an economic-based war while telling you it's an economic-based war. This is how stupid the CIA has been trained to think that you are at home. And this is why I came back to Bustamante in the end of this first week, or to close the first week of the show. They think you're stupid. I mean, who are these people? I often ask myself that question watching these clips and these people talk. Who are these people that they're so arrogant they think they can come onto a stage, a platform in front of the entire world and talk to all of you at home like you're idiots? Who are these people? They've been trained this way. Not only do they think they can do it, they were trained to do it. Your government, our government, has bastardized us in this way. And many of us have participated. But to say that, they can't lose, Russia can't lose the Ukraine, but it's not an economic war, when we know that there's a significant part of Europe that relies on energy from Russia, it's completely ridiculous. And the ruble crashed after the invasion started, and only to recover and actually be worth more than it was before the war started. Because people's vital interests do sometimes overcome their ideological beliefs. Their essential, immediate, visceral interests supersede their ideological principles, which Bustamante also referenced about the flexibility of morals and principles when people are faced with life and death situations. And then finally, he drops the hammer towards the end. He goes, well, Ukraine is most likely going to lose this war unless something, unexpected happens. An oligarch kills Vladimir Putin, or a nuclear bomb goes off somewhere. Nowhere, just somewhere. If a nuke goes off somewhere, that could change the trajectory of the whole war. What he's doing is he's setting the stage for propaganda to go around the world that everybody needs to double down in helping America defeat this tyrant and make them submit to this rules-based order, this post-World War II democratic liberal order, or else all of our survival is at risk. And that is effectively what he's trying to do in that clip and in the entire interview. But sprinkled in there, they're smart enough to mea culpa, right? To admit their own culpability. And that culpability is this: insofar as the Ukraine is a battleground for proxy between the West, the globalists, us here in America, and Russia, they will use it strategically to test Russia's capacity. And Russia may be doing the same thing. And China may be sitting there in the shadow, watching as well. That's a very dark realization. I mean, that's a very dark thing for this guy to even say. Because the way that the narrative is told in the New York Times is that Vladimir Putin is an evil tyrant, and all of the death in the Ukraine, all of the women and children that are suffering the artillery shells, are simply a man who is deranged, who wants to conquer the world, who wants to conquer well beyond his borders. He has an appetite for dictatorship that can't be quenched. He has a thirst for dictatorship that can't be quenched. An appetite that can't be satisfied. But nothing could be further from the truth when you hear the CIA explain the situation. When you hear the CIA explain the situation, this entire conflict is very, very calculated, and is very calculated on both sides. And really, we're being kind of nice when we say both sides, because in actuality, when they say that we don't have a vital interest in the Ukraine, or we don't have an economic interest in the Ukraine, we have to ask ourselves, why was it so important then to push these weapons right up on his border? If we have no interest in the Ukraine and we have no interest in Russia, we're just this independent country, America, that runs the West, or is the big gun for the West, then why are we even in the Ukraine? Why did we even push NATO beyond Poland and violate our agreement with Russia to have weapons there in the Ukraine? What's the interest? Well, there's a lot of interest. I mean, it's a complete lie. That tells you it's a complete lie, but who is it serving? There's one simple answer: the globalists. The globalists that reside in Europe, the monarchies, the metropolitan, omnisexual, anti-God, futurist technocrats. They need Putin's oil as a stopgap until they can get Syria to submit right there in the Middle East and over the Black Sea, where they've now found a new oil basin, which I'm sure they're working on trying to extract. And you may even see a three-front war begin here between America and the West, Russia, Iran, and Syria. And Joe Biden has already talked about the conflict that's brewing with Iran and the willingness to use military action against Iran if they don't agree to the new nuclear deal. So all of these things are happening at once, and they'll tell you a lie with the Ukraine-Russia story, but they'll keep your mind focused on Russia and Ukraine and keep your eyes diverted from anything else that's going on, all these other considerations. And I bring all this stuff up and into your focus or into your purview because what's really being waged against you is the scope of a society and a federal government, but global governance that has become so big, so expansive, so powerful that any of us as citizens struggle to keep up. We struggle to keep up, and I want to be a person who can try and condense and concisely deliver an objective opinion about these things to you on the go, in your car, at home, during your workout, or whatever the case may be, so that you can start to grasp all of these things in their totality. And many people will try and say, well, I'm told all the time, these ideas are too big, or, you're way over people's heads, or you got to talk in layman's terms. And that's a device being waged against you at home. People talking in layman's terms is the way the corrupt have come to be all powerful. It's the way that the corrupt have become absolutely corrupt. Layman's terms, they destroyed your schools, they destroyed your philosophical base, they destroyed the way to critically think. They've targeted our children, they've targeted our elderly, they've targeted all of us. The misinformation machine, the mainstream media that has been influenced so heavily by the security state and our intelligence communities was working on misinforming the American people from the word go. And look up for me. I want to be specific about who said that we'll know our mission is complete when every American citizen that what American citizens believe will be misinformation. Everything will be untrue, basically. We'll know our mission is complete, CIA. And all of you can look these up too. That's why I like to tell you what we're searching. Go to quotes. Yeah, put in quote at the top. Now go to images. Yeah, here we go. This was William Casey, former CIA director, in 1981. We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false. The director of the Central Intelligence Agency, a master of secrets, was quoted at a CIA meeting saying, we'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the people believe is false. It's dark. It's dark time. Dark time, and we're on our way to nuclear war. I mean, nobody knows what Vladimir Putin will do in the end. Or even worse, maybe they do know what he'll do. Maybe he's in on it. That's not lost on me. Believe me. It's not lost on me that Vladimir Putin could be in on this entire thing, and this entire exhibition of military capacity is meant to convey a message to the free people. Remember, Joe Biden said the Second Amendment is an infant, is a toddler. It's weak in the modern day, because in order to fight a tyrannical government, you're going to need F-16s. The president of the United States threatened every American citizen with F-16s if they ever decided to fight against tyranny. The president of the United States. Okay. Bring up the last video that I want to show on Twitter for my Twitter, and we can head out from there. And before you play it, though, I want to continue on this line of thought. We don't know what Vladimir Putin will do, and it's not beyond my. It's not beyond this, a stretch of my imagination that he could actually be in on this thing, and that this entire elitist, globalist, technocrat agenda could include him, and that this shooting gallery that's begun in the Ukraine, or this skirmish between the West and Russia, is all staged. I don't believe that's the case, and I don't want to, I don't want to give a certain level of probability to it. I don't want to allocate a certain percentage of probability to that because I'm not sure. But it's possible. It's possible that they're all in on it together to display power, to display their military capacity to the people, the free people, who by and large are growing increasingly tired of tyranny and corruption and elitism. But if not, and Vladimir Putin is genuinely an opponent or an opposition of the West and the new way of the world, the order, the rules-based order or post-democratic liberal order, and we've decided to start a war just to show our own capacity, or start a war in a place where we have no vital national interest, and the alliance is purely ideological, like Bustamante has claimed, what a position we've put the Ukrainian people in. What a position we've put the Ukrainian people in to sacrifice their women and children in this display, in this exhibition, in this sort of military theater. Who really loses in this war? Vladimir Putin? No. Potentially. I guess they said he could lose his life, get assassinated, but he already knows that. He's survived assassination attempts before. His guy is his thought leader. It's my guy's name that wrote the Rise of the Fourth Political Theory. Can't believe I'm forgetting his name. Oh, Alexander Dugin. Alexander Dugin, assassination attempt on him ended up killing his daughter. That was a serious instigation of this conflict, in my opinion. I think Alexander Dugin and Vladimir Putin have a very, very intimate relationship, not a sexual intimate relationship, but they're very close with one another, especially when it comes to political philosophy and existential philosophy around Russia, the culture of Russia, and the survival of Russia and its identity. I think Alexander Dugin's a very important person in this entire deal, and people should go read his book if you can still find it. And I hope I don't get my episode down for even recommending that reading. Another reading you should do, and I brought this book for a reason. I don't know if you can see this, but this is the decline, the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. This is another book that I recommend. It's Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Russian Empire. Details the fall of the Russian Empire and how it came to be, what circumstances were present from a historical account during the fall of the Roman Empire. Did I say the Russian Empire? Whoa, sorry. The history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, not the Russian Empire, the Roman Empire. I think that's a book everybody should go read. Maybe Vladimir Putin does let off a nuke. What does it say about our leaders? What does it say about the elites that they would be willing to instigate a conflict to the global scale, to a nuclear scale, for a place and in a place that they had no real vital interest in, all as a form of a pissing contest, political theater, a sort of jump ball between international superpowers? It's definitely a lot different than the narrative you're going to hear on Morning Mika, Morning Joe. They're going to tell you that Vladimir Putin is a psychopathic tyrant. He's a bloodthirsty dictator. He's crazy, and he means to undo democracy everywhere. But when you hear the CIA talk, seems that we're in on that game as well. And the last thing I want to leave you with is this. This idea of globalism, this idea that our peace can be hedged on international markets, came straight from the post-World War II democratic liberal order. And Mika's dad, Brzezinski, and Kissinger, and Klaus Schwab were all at the table, who now claim they have no vital interest in Russia, but surely NATO does. And surely NATO includes the metropolitan, omnisexual, anti-God, globalist monarchy and political cabal there in Europe. This idea that we could stave off international conflict if our markets were connected was the start of a clock, just like the splitting of the atom. The splitting of the atom seemed and was heralded as this great scientific achievement, the greatest scientific achievement of all time. And you can go to the Professor Penn podcast and watch him talk about Truman and recall Truman's speech where he heralded the atomic bomb and the dropping of the atomic bomb as this huge scientific achievement. Remember, secularism, the scientific method, the death horse. There it was a physical death. It was a real death. It wasn't metaphorical. There 400,000 Japanese were killed in a display of military capacity. Shows you how things go around and come back around. The claim was that if our international markets were connected, then we would be best served out of a financial and economic interest to keep peace with one another. But it neglected that worldview, in my opinion, was dishonest to begin with, and it was never intended to keep peace. It was intended to keep peace until the globalist agenda could consolidate its stronghold on the international field, on the international board, until they could get a firm grip on the nations of the world. And that's what you've seen the United Nations become. I mean, when you see a General Assembly of most of the nations in the world agree to allow 5 nations, military superpowers, to be the Security Council with veto power, what we're really saying is neoliberalism, neoconservatism, a sort of militaristic war-like mentality is what governs the entire world. And it does. And the military mindset, in some ways, is portrayed in modern culture as a more capitalist, nationalist, sometimes fascist mindset. But in effect, it's one and the same. It's globalist as well. You know, people like to say that Hitler was a nationalist. I would say he was a globalist. He had global ambitions. Mao, I definitely think that had Mao continued to succeed, he had global ambitions. Stalin had global ambitions. Churchill had global ambitions. Churchill probably the best of all of them, but still, in effect, he had the British Empire had global ambitions. They had global ambitions. They have global ambitions. So the military is very misrepresented. And when you think about the United Nations, which is the governing body, the head authority on this conflict between Russia and Ukraine and many geopolitical conflicts, you see nations willingly opt in to a form of governance with military power, military prowess, and the scientific method at the head of it. And the same thing is to be said for our economic and financial system. And the two were birthed in the same place. Not only were they birthed in that post-World War II democratic liberal order, but if you go all the way back to the Enlightenment and the post-Enlightenment ideologies, both were birthed there. Communism on the social side, on the cultural side, military on the liberal side. You get the merger, you get the convergence of both, you have conquest. And many of us have been conquered and we don't know it yet. And the stories we're told is just to appease the deep spiritual rejection of being conquered. That's what the story they're telling you in Ukraine is for. They're telling you the story so that you can accept the conquest that's taking place. It's not about the Ukrainian people being conquered by Putin. It's about each and every one of you being conquered by a military, scientific, method-driven global governance. And I mean to stand against that. That's why I'm doing this podcast. And we're going over a little bit of the 90 minutes here, and I apologize again. I want to keep these under 90 minutes for you, but I'll leave with a bit of housekeeping, and then I want to play a video as we part. A little bit of housekeeping. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, this podcast will premiere at 9 p.m. Next Friday, I plan to have my first family and friends episode. We'll announce who we're interviewing midway through the week. That's my plan. I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the prospects of people who we may interview that we could continue a conversation like this with. Other than that, please like and subscribe. And I know a lot of you, Rumble, YouTube, there's a huge split. There's a huge rift in the online content platform world. Do not resign from these institutions that the left have taken over. We will post every episode on Rumble. Rumble's capacity obviously is growing and does not yet match YouTube, but we like Rumble. I enjoy Rumble, and we're making sure that every episode is up on Rumble. We run into a few technical difficulties in our first few weeks here, but we will make sure that all the content is available on Rumble. But if you can, if you find yourself on YouTube for any reason, please like and subscribe to the channel. We want to get this plane to altitude and continue to bring you the conversation that you want and need. Other than that, subscribe and like to Professor Penn's podcast. You can scroll down into my YouTube channel and see the featured channels, where Professor Penn's podcast is listed there. Like and subscribe to his channel. He's a wealth of knowledge as well, and comes from a perspective of somebody who lived through these events, lived through these policies. I always enjoy my conversations with him as well. We wouldn't waste your time bringing him on this podcast or me on his. We may do a podcast together in the future, and we'll keep you informed on updates for that. I want to play this video for you to help you understand how the wide masses of people are being distracted, and they've used science, technology, the proliferation of technology, the internet, social media, and dopamine to distract you. And for those of you who are listening here, I have a video queued up on Twitter. In this video, the still shot at the beginning of the video, there are two young men, two young men and a woman. The young man on my furthest, on the left, is laying his head on the stomach of this woman who is laying on her back. And there's another young man who she is laying her head on. He's kind of in a seated position, and she's laying her head on his knee. And they look like they're in some type of dance studio room. It's a darkly lit room. I'm trying to set the scene for those who are listening. But this young man has his head, laying on her stomach, and she's laying her head on this other young man's knee, and has a microphone up to her mouth, and they're going to do a little miniature therapy session here. I want to show you this to help you understand the impulse and the culture of false catharsis that we've built, that we've allowed the military, the scientific community to build, while they distract us from more important issues like the potential of nuclear war or the corrupt policies that undergird that conflict. Please play the video.
What are you letting go?
I am letting go of any past negativity that's held me back. I'm letting go of any current negativity that's holding me back. I'm letting go of toxic people, toxic traits, toxic habits, all that shit that just literally gets in the way of me feeling like my best self.
Good.
Letting all of it go.
Let it go. Poof, be gone. Rudy, what are you letting go of?
I'm gonna let go of expecting from others. So I feel like I always have kind of like an idea of what and how people should treat me, talk to me, be how they are around me.
Yeah.
And I think I just need to let that go because everyone is their own individual and they're just their own person. And I can't expect everyone to treat me and talk to me and be around me the same way or a certain way. And that just is gonna save me from any, heartache or annoyance or anything really, because I'm just letting it be versus being like, okay, you need to be this way.
Poof, be gone. Janelle, what are you letting go of? It's almost the same as Rudy's, but of myself. I'm letting go of the expectation that I have to be so just good in every lane of my life. It's exhausting. I just want to do the best I can. I'm only one person, and I can't expect myself to be superhuman, even though we know that we are superhuman in all that we do. So I just kind of have to let go of the expectation that I have to always be on my A game in every lane of my life and allow the A game that I'm serving at that moment to be recognized and to have the gratitude for that time. Everything happens in timing and not everything can be top notch all the time. It's unrealistic. So I'm letting go of that expectation. I'm excited to hear your let goes. Bye.
I'm excited to hear your let goes. This is the sort of let go culture that we've built. This is it. This is false catharsis. This is this radical feminized affirmation that we've come to desire in our society. And this is when I show you that, the reason I do is because this is the foundation upon which social media was built, right? Is this sort of superficial way to deal with all your own self-doubt and inadequacies through democracy, right? Social media is a form of democracy. If you can get enough likes, if you can get enough views, if you can get enough affirming comments, then it's reassurance that you're a good person or that you're a healthy person. And nothing could be further from the truth. Actually, those who are well adjusted in an unhealthy society is no true measure of health whatsoever. This is what the establishment wants you to chew on. This is what the establishment wants you to put in your stomach, to fill your belly up with and your mind up with while they bring us to the brink of nuclear war. Thank you for listening to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy. This podcast was brought to you by Free People Radio. I look forward to seeing you on Monday night. Please like, subscribe, and comment if you can. We'll see you next time. Godspeed.